So we're going to do a dry fly today, and this is a very popular dry fly, one that should be in everybody's dry fly box. It's called the Adams. And this is going to be the traditional style, winding the hackle around the hook shank, but we can also tie it in a parachute style, which actually I find to be a little easier than this style. Nonetheless, I also want to give credit to Tim Flagler of Tightline Productions. I usually follow his tutorials on YouTube, so these are not my patterns. If they were, I would say that, but I'm really just doing recaps of something that somebody knows a whole hell of a lot more than I do, can do way better. So you should definitely check out all of his tutorials as well. So here we go. We're going to tie this on a dry fly hook, and we're going to use a 14, size 14 hook. I do like the Orvis large eye hooks. If you can get those, that gives you a little bit larger eye than that. Makes it a whole lot easier, especially as you get down in sizes, to tie on your tippet on the stream. So the first thing we're going to do is use some black thread, and the pattern can call for 8/0. I've really started using a 14/0 thread for some of my smaller flies and dry flies, and it just gives you a little bit more room. It doesn't bulk up quite so much. So we're just going to tie this on and let the thread dangle at about the 1/3 mark, about 1/3 back from the hook eye. And one of the most important things to remember is to leave plenty of room for the hackle and enough room to tie a little head as well. So in Tim's pattern, he ties the wings on first, but I actually find that a little awkward. So I'm going to come back and let the thread hang at about the hook point, and I'm going to tie the tail in. And the tail, a traditional tail, would be to use a combination of brown hackle and grizzly hackle combination, and you would strip off some of the barbs from the stem. You do need to use stiff feathers. Sometimes the feathers at the sides of a cape will be stiffer, especially if they're short and spade-like. They're harder to find these days because the chickens are bred to have the longer feathers. So I've actually started using this type of product here. This is called Coq de Lion, and it's a very, very beautiful feather. Comes out of a Spanish breed of hen, and the asset of this type of feather is, number one, the beautifully speckled barbs, and the barbs from the feathers themselves are nice and stiff, so they're great for tailing material. They can be a little expensive if you buy them just one little bundle at a time, but I have bought them in patches, and that seems to be a little bit more economical. So I've just stripped off a few barbs, maybe a dozen, from the stem of the Coq de Lion feather, and I'm going to measure that the length of the tail to be about 1 hook shank long, and then I'm going to transfer that measurement down. Take a little pinch there. I'm going to cut off the excess where it would end before the wing post. I'm going to give my bobbin a little counterclockwise spin, and that's going to help that thread to jump backwards. And I'm going to just wind the thread back down to the hook bend, and I lift a little bit and pull towards me as I go, and that's going to help the feather tail materials to stay on the top of the hook shank versus rotate around to the back. So there we go. At this point, we can tie on the wings or dub the body, and I'm just going to go ahead and dub the body and get that out of the way. So I'm going to come right back to the bend. We're just slightly before the bend. And take a little light brown dubbing. This is just a nice, soft, super fine dubbing. This one has a little bit of a sparkle to it. I think that's not going to hurt it in any way. And I'm going to take the tiniest, teeniest wisp of dubbing and start to build up a really thin noodle on the thread, just a little bit at a time, weaving the bottom of the first bunch with the top of the second bunch. You can see that it's very, very, very slight. You can try to move it up closer to the hook. That's going to help when you go to wind. And I'd say this dubbing noodle should be about an inch long. You could always add more. It's pretty tough to take it away, but that's something like that. All right, so I'm going to try to get in nice and close so as not to bang the camera. And you can see that it's not quite at the hook bend, so I'm just going to wrap back a couple of times until I get to the bend, and then start to make touching wraps, trying to keep it nice and even and consistent until I get to that first tie-in point. And you can see I'm just a tiny bit shy, which is fine. And I'm going to just put another little smidgen on there. And now I'm all done with my body. I don't have to worry about it anymore. The next step is, I think, the hardest, and it's to put in the little two grizzly hackle tips as wings. And on small flies, they're pretty small. So I've prepared them already, and you can see that it's just the very, very tip of a feather with some bare stem at the base. And the feather itself wants to be about a hook gap in length, so in height. So that's pretty small. So this feather is actually twice as high as it should be. So that's about where I want it to be. So I'm going to strip off a little bit more of this hackle at the base. Just pinch it off from side to side. I'm not going to do it perfectly. So it's a little shorter now. So I have a second one here. And I'm going to do the same thing to that. Just take a few of these barbs off. And then I want to lay those feathers with their shiny sides facing each other, the dull side out. So the goal is to maybe hope that they will splay out when I go to put them on the hook shank. So I'm going to turn them around. It's a lot to grab onto. And I'm going to stack them up. Try to get their the tips aligned. And I'm going to come back just a little bit and then tie these on. And you can see now, I can totally see why we would dub afterwards. That's okay, I can fix that. So I'm going to tie them on with a nice tight pinch wrap and come back a little bit. So live and learn. I'm going to have to redub that section right there, but it's not a big deal. So before I do that, I'm going to come back to the front of the wing and just do a couple of turns in front to try to get those wings to stand up just like that. So that worked out pretty good. So just so, yeah, I think I'm not even going to worry about that hackle, the dubbing at the back. So I'm just going to clean that up so I don't get in the hook eye. Now, you can see that those are splayed out pretty nicely, but they're not going to stay that way if I go to put hackle on there. So I'm going to go ahead and do some figure 8 wraps, go in between them a couple of times. You can see that they're starting to lock down. And then, if you can, literally do a figure 8 with your thread, like that. And then that one's not going to work. I'm just going to leave it be. And then lock it down. Let me go around one more time. Okay. I do want to end with my thread behind the wing. Okay, I can live with that. Now I've prepared 2 hackle feathers, and you want to use one brown and one grizzly, and these do want to be measured so that the hook barbs, the feather barbs, are equivalent to the size of the hook. So these are a number 14 size feather. So with the feather this long, you can get several flies out of each one. So I'm going to just start at the base. It's a little rough at the bottom, so I'm going to clean it up, and then I'm going to remove all the barbs from the base of the feather like that, and a little bit extra at the top of the feather. So this is with the shiny side facing you, and I'm going to cut off most of that so that it's about 1/16 of an inch long, and tie that in with the shiny side facing me. 1, 2, 3 good wraps should do it. It's really just tacking it down. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this brown feather. This one has a little bit more webby material on it, so I'm going to clean that off. Same thing, and I'm going to stack that right up in the front, tie it up on my side, get it lashed down really nicely. And if it looks like it's too long and it's going to hit the eye, just clean that up first, and then come on in and lash down the front of it. And at this point, I would do a whip finish or two, or a couple of half hitches, just to keep that thread from moving, because that can be pretty frustrating. But once again, we're going to leave plenty of room for the eye. So, go back in. Just do a little half hitch, so that's not going to go anywhere. Now, I'm going to wrap these manually, but if you have a rotary vise, this would be a perfect opportunity to do that. So if your feather is not a long feather, so I've got a short one here and a long one, I'm going to use my hackle pliers for the shorter one, just so I don't run out of room. And you want to always start with the feather that you tied on last. So that would have been the brown one. So I'm going to do a couple of wraps in back of the wing. Really, if you can get 3 or 4 in there, even better. However much room you have is going to dictate how many wraps. So I think I can only get 2 wraps in the front of the fly here. Then we want to tie it off. Just get in there and tuck it in. And then I'm going to do 3 just to be on the safe side. And then we can cut off the excess nice and tight. Now the grizzly hackle is pretty long, so I don't think I'm going to need my hackle pliers, but you do want it to go in the right orientation, so I have to really kind of manipulate this a little bit to get it to spin in the right direction. There we go. So you want it to go in between the brown hackle wraps. I have to work this a little harder to get in there, just to get it to straighten out and not mash anything down at the same time. So there we go. It's not great, but I'm going to live with it. So a couple wraps behind. I think I can do one more. And then here, I think I'm only going to be able to get 1 wrap in front. I'm going to live with that. And same thing. You're going to lash it down. You can see where the acid of using a thin thread gives you a little bit more wiggle room in the front of the fly. Cut off that nice and tight. If you've got some wayward barbs, you can kind of push them back like that, and then tie off a nice neat head. I kind of shorten up a little bit. And if you dare, you can do a whip finish. It's going to be tough to do with the camera so close, so I'm just going to do half hitches. And cut off your excess thread. At this point, I'm going to clean up any hairs that don't look like they're laying correctly. Try to adjust that wing a little bit. And there you have it, the Adams Dry Fly. It is a mayfly imitation.